The tape starts with breathing, just breathing, shaky, uneven, like the person holding the recorder isn't sure if they're even supposed to be alive right now. My name is Ethan Ward, former field specialist for a small paranormal investigation group operating out of southern Appalachia. And if anyone ever hears this recording, just know one thing. We never should have gone onto that ridge. Everything was wrong the moment we arrived. There was no wind, no insects, just a suffocating stillness, like the entire forest was holding its breath along with us. Even the trees looked dead without actually being dead. Bark dry but not rotted. Branches twisted, not naturally grown but shaped, directed, like something sculpted them from the inside. I kept whispering to Mason, "Do you hear that?" He kept whispering back, "Hear what?" But I swear there were voices, not from any direction, just around us. Like the ground itself was remembering screams. When we found the burial stones, old, carved with symbols nothing like the Welsh or Scots graves common up here, something clicked in me. Like memory that wasn't mine, like someone else's terror just downloaded into my skull. Mason tried to back away. I tried to too, and then the entire ridge answered us. The ground groaned, low at first, then sharp, angry, like bones grinding under the soil, and something under there moved. When the ridge screamed, it didn't sound like anything alive. It sounded like something ancient trying to wake up. I ran. I didn't plan it. I didn't think. My body just obeyed some primitive survival instinct that said, "Run, or you're going to get re-ridden into the dirt." Mason grabbed my jacket sleeve and we both slid down a slope covered in brittle dead leaves that somehow didn't break or crumble beneath us. They just bent like wet skin. I remember thinking, nature doesn't behave like this. Nothing behaves like this. We didn't stop until we hit the logging road where the truck was parked. I kept trying to unlock my phone with shaking hands, fighting this stupid adrenaline fog that felt like I was underwater. Finally, I got the door open, slammed myself into the driver's seat, and Mason leaned on the window with both arms. He was pale. Not scared pale, sick pale. Like the blood in his body already knew it shouldn't be here anymore. He whispered one thing. Not loud, not panicked, just broken. We weren't supposed to see that. That's the line, that tiny whisper, that keeps replaying every night. Not the screams, not the ground movement, not the soil shifting like muscle around bone. That sentence. Because he wasn't talking about us trespassing on private land. He meant we weren't supposed to be shown that the ridge itself was alive. We weren't amateurs. People assume paranormal investigators are TikTok scammers with K2 meters they bought off eBay and edited screams layered into fake EVP files. That's not us. We were hired by retired law enforcement, ex-military, old miners, old people who don't play games with devils or gossip. And they all had the same warning about this specific mountain chain. The oldest graves aren't the settlers. We used to think that meant indigenous burial. But no tribe claimed those stones. They didn't match any known language families. They weren't local Appalachian cryptic religious sects either. There were no old church records, no genealogical threads, no oral folklore beyond one recurring whisper across every family line that still lived within a day's drive. Don't step near that ridge after sundown. So of course, being young, ambitious, stupid, we went directly there at sundown. That night, after we escaped back to the truck, I drove us to the closest town with 24-hour lights, a gas station diner in a tiny place called Brasher Hollow. The sky behind us stayed perfectly black the entire time, not normal night black, like the stars refused to shine anywhere near the ridge. My brain knew that wasn't possible, but I also kept checking the mirror like some part of the forest was behind us, pacing us, staying just out of headlight range. Inside the diner, we sat in a corner booth, silent, shaking, while the waitress poured us coffee. She didn't ask if we wanted it. She just poured it, like we looked exactly like two people who needed it to stay intact. After a minute, she finally spoke. Not directly to us, just as if telling the air the rule of this land. This place don't wake things up. It keeps things asleep. That line is the moment the tone flipped for me forever. Before that sentence, that night could have been chalked up to high stress, pareidolia, weird underground animal movement, trick acoustics, panic responses. I study psychology. I know how the brain invents terror to protect you from the unknown. I know the limbic system can hallucinate threat when there isn't one. But people don't talk like that unless they know what's actually buried in their backyard. She wouldn't even take money when we left. She just said, "Go home before it follows you off that mountain." We should have listened, but investigators have a sickness, a need to prove the unknown real, and when we got back to the cabin, we realized we weren't done with that ridge. Our equipment was still up there. Camera rigs, thermal sensors, wireless boom mics embedded in the soil, 2 full-spectrum recorders. The ridge wake-up event happened in the middle of setup. We hadn't even finished calibrating the second channel, which means all those devices were still collecting data. We were terrified. And yet the idea of losing that evidence was unbearable. Mason said it first, barely above a whisper. "We go at sunrise." And I agreed like it wasn't even a choice. Like something in me needed to return, even then. It already felt like we'd been marked. I tried to sleep for maybe 30 minutes. Mason paced the cabin floor nonstop. I kept hearing the ridge groan again in my head like slow tectonic breathing. Eventually I just sat up and stared out the window. There were no animal sounds in the woods around the cabin. No owls, no coyotes, no night insects. The wilderness was muted like the entire ecosystem chose not to disturb whatever we accidentally stirred, just stillness. A silence so thick it pressed against the glass, like a second atmosphere trying to seep inside. And sometime around 3:17 a.m., I felt the cabin floorboards vibrate under my feet. Quiet, subtle, like someone dragging something heavy across the soil outside. But the cabin was built on concrete piers. Nothing should vibrate like that. That was the moment I fully understood. The ridge wasn't just a place, it was a thing, a living, listening, ancient thing, and it had noticed us. The ridge wasn't just a forested hill anymore. It was a pulse beneath the soil, a living lattice of something that predated humans, predated mountains as we understood them. Every step we took that morning toward the old stone markers felt like walking on memory, on thought, on anticipation. The air was thick, humid, and heavy as if the forest exhaled in slow, deliberate waves. I could feel it in my chest. Mason was quieter than usual, lips pressed tight, eyes darting at shadows that weren't there. We reached the first stone. It was a monolith of blackened granite, jagged but unnaturally symmetrical. Symbols spiraled along its sides, glyphs that refused to settle into a language. Some curves almost looked organic, like veins or roots feeding something below the surface. My recorder picked up static the closer I leaned. Mason's hand trembled as he traced a finger along a spiral. "Ethan, do you feel that?" he whispered. "Feel what?" He shook his head, eyes wide. "Like it's watching us, under the soil. It knows we're here." I swallowed hard. He wasn't usually the type to speak in that tone, but even my own stomach boiled. I could feel a subtle vibration beneath my boots, a rhythm that wasn't random. Not wind, not footsteps. Something alive, but buried. We set up the first thermal camera on the ridge edge, just overlooking the stones. Mason's hands were stiff, fingers barely clicking the buttons. I checked the audio feed from the soil-embedded microphones. Nothing human, just low humming pulses. It started faint, like distant thunder. And then slowly, unevenly, the pulses moved. The ridge was communicating, or something under it was. "Ethan," Mason said, voice tight. I think it knows our heartbeat." I forced a laugh. "It's a mountain, Mason. Mountains don't know heartbeats." But the laugh died in my throat when the ground shifted. Not like an earthquake, more like muscle under the surface, coiling, tightening, stretching. One of the smaller stones tilted almost imperceptibly, as if something under it had flexed. We both froze. Then a voice came from the microphones. Not from the trees, not from the wind, from the soil itself. A whisper that wasn't in English, but my brain tried to force it into meaning. "Leave." I blinked. Mason froze. I swear the ridge seemed to inhale, drawing us in with its gravity. The flashbacks started then. I had never believed in memory bleeding from the environment, but the ridge didn't care. I saw visions of figures hunched over the stones centuries ago. Tall, spindly, not quite human. Their limbs bent at angles wrong for our skeletons. They traced the glyphs, pressed them into soil like ritual, and then disappeared beneath the earth with a quiet slurp of dirt sealing over them. What the hell is this?" Mason's voice broke. "I don't know," I admitted. But they weren't human. They can't be. We moved carefully, stepping between the monoliths. Each one seemed to throb subtly, the glyphs almost writhing under our gaze. The microphones picked up faint scratching like nails over bone. I switched to thermal and saw heat signatures beneath the soil, not localized, not animal. A network of heat spreading, coiling, pulsating like veins under the ridge. It was alive, and it was aware of us. Mason tried to backtrack, but I stopped him. We need evidence. If we leave now, we'll never prove it exists. He swallowed, his face pale. It's already proven itself, Ethan. We shouldn't be here. We pressed on. Each step brought new micro-events. A branch cracked nearby, then the sound repeated behind us. Nothing visible. A low groan rumbled beneath the ridge. Our equipment beeped and flickered. One of the soil mics recorded faint whispers, overlapping voices, a conversation in tongues our brains struggled to parse. Do you hear them? I whispered. Mason nodded. His hands shook. They're talking. The ridge wasn't just sentient. It had memory. It had history. And it was reacting. I knelt by one of the stones and touched it. The glyphs felt warm like pulsing veins, and then the vision hit me full force. Not a memory I'd lived, but one that wanted me to live it. A figure in a hooded cloak pressing its hand against the soil, murmuring syllables that vibrated my teeth. The ground lifted slightly, a soft bulge moving as if something massive crawled beneath. And then the figure sank into the soil, swallowed whole by the ridge. I staggered back. Mason grabbed me. Ethan, we have to leave now. But leaving was impossible. The ridge had changed. The path back was gone. Trees weren't where they had been. Rocks shifted subtly. The very slope had reformed, bending in impossible ways. It was a labyrinth, and we were inside its mind. We tried to document it. Cameras, audio, notes. But every device seemed to betray us. Batteries drained unnaturally fast. Microphones picked up static that became whispers, sometimes screaming. One camera caught movement below the stones. Hundreds of tiny limbs writhing in patterns, forming tunnels, crawling just beneath the surface. Nothing human, nothing animal. A hive. Ethan, Mason whispered again, voice cracking. I think it wants to eat us. No, I said, voice shaking. It doesn't eat. It collects. It wants to remember us, become part of it. And then it happened. The ground convulsed under our feet. A wall of soil rose like a wave. One of the stones shattered from below, fragments flying outward as a shape emerged. A skeletal, multi-limbed form, eyes nowhere, and yet watching. Hundreds of veins pulsed along its back. It moved not with legs or arms, but with the undulation of the ridge itself, a terrifying choreography of earth and thought. I screamed. Mason screamed. Our shouts were swallowed instantly. No echoes. Just the vibration of the ridge throbbing in time with our heartbeats. We ran blindly. One of the monoliths collapsed behind us, revealing dozens of smaller forms, thin, pale, scuttling under the surface, each pressing their heads against the soil like sensory nodes. They were everywhere. They knew we were alive, and they were cataloging. Mason tripped. I grabbed him. His eyes were wide, unblinking, filled with raw terror. Ethan, it's recording us. Memories, thoughts. It's stealing them. And that's when I realized everything that had happened in my head that morning, the visions, the whispers, the sense of familiarity with the ridge, wasn't my mind. It was theirs. They were implanting history into me, feeding through my perception, connecting me to a memory that stretched before humanity existed. We climbed another slope, slipping, hands in soil that seemed to grip like fingers. Every movement elicited low-frequency hums from below, resonating in our chest. Mason vomited, shaking. I couldn't look away from the ridge, couldn't stop recording. I had to capture it, even if it destroyed me. The further we went, the more the ridge seemed to wake. Patterns in the dirt formed shapes, symbols that shifted if you blinked, paths that vanished if you tried to memorize them. I heard voices behind leaves and soil, even through our own equipment. Low, layered, chanting, speaking in tongues we weren't meant to understand. At one point, Mason froze, his hands in the dirt, staring at a tiny mound. I bent down. The mound twitched. Tiny skeletal fingers broke the soil, pressing against the air. A miniature figure rose, grotesque, head too large, limbs angular, eyes empty pits. And then it recoiled, as if a larger presence reminded it of our location. We're part of it now, Mason whispered, voice hollow. It's integrating us into the hive. I felt it then, every nerve ending vibrating. The ridge wasn't just alive. It was aware. Every thought we had, every heartbeat, every fear, it cataloged and stored. Memories of explorers who came centuries before were faintly visible in my mind. They had tried to map it, to understand it, to flee, and all of them ended beneath the soil, as preserved echoes in the hive's network. We tried to speak, tried to call for help. Phones, radios, everything failed. Only our recorder picked up the whispers. They spoke of patience, of eternity, of the inevitability of being consumed, not by flesh, but by memory. Hours, or was it minutes, passed. The ridge reshaped itself constantly. Shadows formed under trees where no roots could be. The ground bulged with living pressure. I realized with crushing clarity, the ridge never forgets. Every intruder, every investigator, every soul that set foot on its soil was catalogued, their essence integrated, their story becoming part of the hive's memory. Mason's face twisted in horror. It's showing me them, all of them, the people who vanished, all the explorers, the settlers who tried to bury it, the families who fled. They're inside it, Ethan. Yes, I whispered. And now it wants us too. The ridge pulsed, a soft, rhythmic thrum growing louder with every heartbeat. Soil quivered, stones shifted, and small forms emerged, scuttling like ants. I realized then that the stones weren't graves. They were sigils, terrains of awareness, nodes of consciousness that mapped the hive, and every interaction we had disturbed the network, alerted the sleeping intelligence. We ran. I clutched the recorder, capturing every whisper, every tremor. Mason dragged himself behind me, sobbing. Every instinct screamed, flee. But the ridge was patient. It waited, watching, learning, integrating, and I understood the truth in that shivering, screaming realization. We could leave the ridge. We could escape its surface. But the hive had already begun its work. Pieces of our memory, our fear, our terror, already woven into its lattice. By the time we stumbled onto a logging road hours later, the ridge was still behind us, silent in appearance, but alive, watching, cataloging, waiting. And that's when Mason whispered the words that would haunt me forever. They know we remember. And now they will follow. The hive wasn't just a thing buried in soil. It was history itself, ancient, patient, eternal, and we were now part of its story. The ridge waited, not silently, not passively, but like a predator aware we had returned, aware we had survived its first embrace and yet still clinging to life. We tried to sleep that night, but the forest refused it. The trees' shadows moved in impossible directions. The wind whispered through cracks in the cabin walls, carrying syllables we couldn't translate, voices that weren't ours but knew us intimately. Mason sat frozen on the floor, eyes darting to corners where nothing existed. I can hear it, he whispered, voice raw. It's inside the walls. My name, your name. Everything we thought we knew remembered wrong. I gripped the recorder. It had captured some of the ridge's intelligence before, some of its memory, some of its consciousness. And now, listening, it played back not sounds but understandings, visions, knowledge we weren't ready for. A map of the ridge, of tunnels, of the living veins beneath the soil. Shapes of the small forms scuttling, the skeletal limbs moving. Pulses that were its heartbeat, and ours. We had no plan. No weapons. Nothing could stop it. And I knew it. My limbs trembled not just from fear, but from understanding. Any confrontation would not be a battle. It was inevitable. We returned to the ridge at first light. Our equipment barely functioned, yet we carried it like talismans, like proof that we had survived the previous encounter. The air was heavier than before. Every footstep pressed into soil that felt like muscle. The first stone rose slightly, like it sensed us, and then the tremors began, low at first, vibrating our chests. The ridge breathed, Mason gasped. It's alive! Yes, I said, voice low. And it remembers. The hive's intelligence was no longer passive. Forms erupted from beneath the soil. Hundreds of tiny pale figures with angular limbs scuttled across the surface, swarming like ants, pressing against our legs, crawling toward our boots, vanishing into soil, then re-emerging. They were everywhere, watching, cataloging, learning. I raised my camera. The lens barely captured them. Heat signatures twisted and coiled under the ridge, spreading outward. The ground trembled violently. Then a shape emerged fully, skeletal, too long-limbed, with no eyes, only dark hollows that seemed to see everything. It moved not like an animal, but like a memory, a sculpture animated from ancient thought. Mason screamed. I shouted, but no sound carried. The ridge swallowed it instantly. It had always been swallowing, not bodies, memories, awareness. And now it was aware of us fully. We tried to retreat. The slope behind us had disappeared. Trees shifted, roots grabbed our ankles. Shadows bent into impossible angles, cutting off escape. And then the voices. A chorus from the soil, layered, overlapping, speaking words that pried into our minds. The hive communicated in understanding, in emotion, in terror. Memories we never lived were pressed into our minds. Faces of explorers, settlers, miners, investigators, all of them integrated, all of them screaming silently, stored inside the ridge. Mason collapsed. I grabbed him. We can't leave. Not until it's done with us. The ridge pulsed. And then it spoke. Not through whispers, not through voices, but inside us. In our skulls. You belong. I staggered, clutching my head. Every memory I had, every moment of life, every fear and desire it cataloged. The ridge didn't want our bodies. It wanted our consciousness, to fold us into its lattice of memory. I tried to shout, to resist, but my voice was drowned in the hum, vibrating through my teeth, vibrating through my bones. The skeletal forms pressed closer, scuttling over our boots, crawling under the stones, vanishing, then reappearing closer. Mason's hand clutched mine. Do you feel it? He whispered. It's reading us, learning us, our fears, our guilt. Everything we hide, I nodded. The sensation was unbearable. Images flashed in my mind, the ridge's previous visitors. A miner from the 1800s, his arm reaching up from beneath soil. A settler mother screaming silently as the earth swallowed her children. Investigators who had left behind recordings and notes that now pulsed with life inside the hive. And then the ridge pressed further. One of the stones erupted. A skeletal form the size of a man rose, limbs bending in impossible angles. Its skull split along a seam, revealing an interior lattice that pulsed with light like veins. It raised its hand, if it could be called that, and the ground around us buckled, sloshing like liquid underfoot. We stumbled backward. Mason vomited again. I could see our own reflections in the wet soil, distorted, twisted, alive. The ridge was not just an entity. It was a network of awareness. We were nodes now, involuntarily connected. I tried to speak. Leave, go, no. My words were swallowed. The ridge responded through us instead of to us. Every thought we had, every attempted motion became catalogued and anticipated. Escape was impossible. Then came the smaller forms, hundreds of them, scuttling and climbing over the skeletal giant. They pressed against the ground, vibrating, sending pulses upward. The large figure convulsed, the lattice of light beneath its skull brightening. And then a low resonant hum filled my head. Not sound, thought, pressure, fear. You will remain. You will remember. You will belong, Mason screamed. I grabbed him, but his body went stiff. His eyes were wide, unblinking, filled with raw terror. The ridge's intelligence had reached into him fully. He convulsed as if being rewritten from the inside. I tried to drag him away, tried to resist the pull, but my own limbs grew heavy. My memories, my personality was being catalogued, integrated, flattened, and yet I could still feel fragments of myself screaming. The skeletal giant moved closer. I could see the lattice beneath its skull expanding, tendrils of pulsing light stretching out, sinking into the soil, connecting to the smaller forms. Every pulse vibrated in my chest. Every thought I tried to resist was anticipated and overwritten. Mason muttered something. Not words, not sentences, just syllables that I recognized. And then, they want us complete. The ridge pulsed, rising like a wave beneath the stones. The skeletal giant lowered its head toward us, and in its skull, I could see the faces of every person who had ever encountered this place. Their terror, their confusion, their memory, layered infinitely. And I knew impossibly that we were about to join them. I screamed, a raw, guttural sound. Mason screamed in unison, our voices drowned immediately in a pulse that vibrated through every nerve. Then the smaller forms scuttled forward, pressing against our bodies. Not physically, they weren't flesh, but pressing against awareness itself. Thoughts, memories, identity, they were cataloging everything. Time warped. Moments stretched and collapsed. I saw our past, our childhoods, every failure, every fear. The ridge absorbed them instantly. Mason was gone. Not dead, not alive, not human, integrated, and then I was next. I fought, tried to resist, tried to flee, but the ridge pulsed in rhythm with my heartbeat, in rhythm with every pulse in the forest. Its hive intelligence was complete. My mind was catalogued. My fears, my thoughts, my entire narrative folded into the ridge. And yet, fragments of me remained, screaming inside the lattice. The skeletal giant bent over, pulsing, every movement calculated, precise, inevitable. The small form scuttled upward, integrating, cataloging, mapping. And then silence, but not silence. Awareness remained. Presence remained. The ridge watched. The hive held us all. I realized finally there was no escape. There had never been escape. Every investigator, every curious mind that dared to probe the ridge, already part of the network. Already remembered. Already cataloged. Mason's voice echoed faintly in my mind, though I knew it was not him anymore. "Ethan, you can't fight!" I screamed into the lattice anyway, and the ridge pulsed in response. It had won. The cabin was silent, too silent, or maybe it wasn't silent. Maybe the silence itself was alive, carrying the vibrations of the ridge, carrying the echoes of what had happened. I opened my eyes and didn't recognize the world outside. The forest seemed normal at first glance, the wind, the birds, the faint rustle of leaves, but I knew better. The ridge was still there, always there, and somewhere inside it, Mason existed no longer as he had been. I tried to stand. My body felt heavy, like gravity had been multiplied 100-fold. My limbs obeyed, but sluggishly. I reached for my recorder. It was still in my hands. The screen flickered faintly, displaying the last recording. But it wasn't normal. There were voices layered within the audio, overlapping syllables that didn't belong to us, fragments of memories not ours. A chorus of investigators, explorers, and settlers. I could hear their fear, their confusion, their resignation. I pressed play, and the hum of the ridge seemed to seep through the speakers into my chest. I wanted to throw it across the room, destroy it, but my hands wouldn't let me. Part of me knew it was too late. My mind had already been cataloged. A fragment, yes, still there, but the rest integrated, remembered, folded into something vast and incomprehensible. Outside, the ridge loomed over the horizon, its black monoliths jagged against the morning sun. Not a mountain, not a forest, not land. Something alive, watching, patient, eternal. I could feel it pulsing beneath the soil, tendrils of consciousness reaching outward, tracing my location even here. Even now, I left the cabin. Every step on the soft forest floor made my chest ache. Branches rustled overhead, and shadows moved just slightly too fast, just slightly too deliberate. I passed the trees, the brush, the old logging paths, and everything seemed wrong. The world was still itself, but I was no longer fully myself. My mind carried pieces of the hive's memory, its awareness, its slow, methodical patience. I reached a town at the edge of the forest. Brasher Hollow. Gas stations, diners, empty streets. I tried to speak to anyone at all, but my voice sounded distant, hollow. When I spoke, it carried faint echoes of the ridge, a vibrating undertone I couldn't control. People stared, eyes widening. Some stepped back. One man turned and walked quickly into a convenience store, muttering to himself, clearly unnerved. I didn't understand his reaction at first, now I do. The ridge communicates, even through us, even in ways subtle and inescapable. I found a small motel, paid cash, no questions asked, no recognition. I booked the room and locked the door behind me. I sat on the edge of the bed, trembling, trying to breathe. Mason's absence was palpable. I couldn't stop seeing him. The way his eyes had gone vacant, the way the ridge had reached into him, rewriting, cataloging, integrating. I imagined him still beneath the soil, a fragment of consciousness trapped forever, screaming silently into the hive. And I realized that was my fate too. I had survived physically, but mentally, partially gone. Pieces of me were already woven into the lattice of the ridge. Memories I once thought private, moments I thought mine, gone, integrated. I could feel the pulse beneath my skin, echoing, insistent. A reminder that nothing is ever truly safe once touched by the ridge. I tried to write notes, tried to describe the events, to warn anyone who might come after. My pen moved, but the words felt alien. They twisted, rearranged themselves, phrases forming that I hadn't intended. I wrote of the stones, of the hive, of the skeletal forms. I wrote of the whispers, the pulses, the terrors that unfolded beneath the earth. But even as I wrote, I knew that what I described was incomplete. The ridge cannot be captured in words, only in experience. The television in the room flickered. A local news segment. A forest ranger mentioned strange soil patterns discovered on the ridge. A hiker reported voices underfoot, something unexplainable. I turned it off immediately. Too close, too real. And then I felt it. The ridge, even now, reaching outward through news, through memory, through thought. Always cataloging, always patient, always inevitable. I tried to call my team. The others, but the lines were dead. Not technically dead, just dead to the ridge's influence. The pulse in my skull reminded me that it already knew. And perhaps it had always known. The ridge does not make mistakes. It waits, integrates, persists. I spent the night in a vigil of anxiety, half sleeping, half conscious. Each time my eyes closed, visions came, the skeletal forms crawling beneath the soil, the small pale nodes pressing against the earth, Mason's vacant gaze and the countless other investigators, explorers, settlers, all folded into the network. The ridge did not forget. It never would, and now a piece of me was part of it. By morning I realized I could not return, could not warn anyone properly, could not erase what had been done. The ridge's presence stretched beyond the mountain, subtle, almost imperceptible, but I knew it was there, cataloging the land, the forest, my mind. I was changed, hollowed, connected, a fragment walking outside the hive's physical boundaries. I walked back to the edge of the forest, stood at the logging road that led back to the ridge. My heart ached in anticipation, even though I knew what awaited. I did not enter. I could feel the pull, the hive's curiosity. The ridge would wait. It would remember, and it would continue to claim, to catalog, to integrate anyone who dared step too close. Mason's voice echoed faintly in my thoughts, a reminder and a warning. You can't fight it. You belong now too. I turned away, but the ridge followed me, not with sight, not with sound, but with thought. I could feel it in the vibration under my feet, in the pulse of the soil beneath every step, in the subtle hum that vibrated in my skull. I left Brasher Hollow, left the roads, left signs of life behind. But I knew the ridge would continue to watch, continue to catalog, continue to wait. And I knew, impossibly, that a part of me was already folded into its network. My thoughts, my fears, my memory, stored, preserved, integrated into something vast, something eternal, something patient. And then I understood fully, no one leaves the ridge unchanged. Survivors are rare, and even rarer are those who remain fully themselves. I would never be the same. Mason would never be the same. And the ridge would endure, patient, eternal, unstoppable. The final terror was quiet, insidious. Not screams, not flashes, not blood. It was understanding. The hive is eternal, the memory is endless, and the ripple of terror spreads far beyond the mountain. I could feel it now, always watching, always cataloging, always patient. I checked the recorder one last time. Faint whispers, mine, Mason's, fragments of investigators long dead, layered into a chorus of consciousness. I dropped it into the woods behind the motel. It didn't matter. The ridge already had our memories. Our fears. Our story. I walked away. Hollowed, broken, yet alive. A fragment cataloged. And I knew I would never truly escape. The ridge waited. Always. And I, whether I liked it or not, would never forget.